The pilot's screen gives us a whole set of options that we can use to customize our experience when flying with FS Flying School Pro. We can control the things that the instructors are monitoring, and we can also control the aircraft's reliability, and we can also control the sort of thing that the instructors are going to help us with when we're flying in Flight Simulator. If we look first at the sound setup area of the pilot screen, the first rather important decision we have to make is who we want to fly with. We've got a team of instructors that are available from this drop down here, and we've got male and female instructors of different nationalities, and they've got slightly different personalities, and you may just prefer some of the voices over the others. It's also the case that the default instructor, Mr. Smith, is the instructor that has the most features in the FS Flying School Pro program. Not all of the instructors support all of the features of the program, but the default instructor, Mr. Smith, does support all of the features. So if you want to be able to try out all the different features of the program, then certainly we'd recommend that you start off with Mr. Smith. And if you want to test the sound of the voice, then of course you can just click the Listen to Instructor button, and you will hear the instructor. That's also, of course, a convenient way to check that your sound setup is configured correctly, which it normally would be right out of the box. You just install FS Flying School Pro, and in the vast majority of cases, the sound will simply work right from the installation. Right. Moving through the options, we can disable the sound if we wish. It sounds like a strange thing to do with a program that has talking instructors. Why would we want to turn the sound off? You might want to do this if it's a day when you just want some peace and quiet up there in the aircraft, but you do want FS Flying School to, for example, give you a score at the end of your flight, or perhaps you want to use the flight mapping system whereby you can submit the flight route to our website and then view it using Google Maps. These are things that don't require a talking instructor, so you can turn the sound off if you want to. Moving down, we can also display captions in Flight Simulator. So this is text that is displayed on the screen. It's a general sense of what the instructor is saying. Sometimes the instructor is saying far too much to all be displayed in a caption on the screen. You couldn't possibly read it that quickly, so we will have to abbreviate what the instructor is saying. But generally speaking, this can be very useful to people who have hearing difficulties, or perhaps somebody for whom English is not a first language. So it will make it easier to get a grasp on what the instructor has just said, and of course sometimes it is said very quickly because there isn't much time. For example, when you're coming into landing, the instructor may need to speak very quickly to you in takeoff and landing, that sort of thing. So it's just generally useful, but if you don't want it appearing on your screen when you're flying in Flight Simulator, then of course you can. It's an option. You can turn it off if you so wish. We also have the background chatter. So this will be the sort of thing that you will hear from your instructor when basically when things are fairly quiet. It's essentially when you're cruising along, you've reached your you've settled in at your cruise altitude, and you're cruising along. There's not a lot happening. It's not like you're taking off or landing or something like that. It's not a busy time. And the instructor at that time may be asking you just general aviation questions, things to be thinking about, like, well, where would you land in an emergency, for example, or how much fuel are we going to have left when we reach our destination, this sort of thing. It's the sort of thing that you should be thinking about. I will point out at this point, he does not expect you to answer, he or she, they do not expect you to answer the question. They're just posing the questions. They're making you think about the sorts of things that you should be thinking about as a pilot. But there is no mechanism in the program for the instructors, as it were, to listen to your answers and then tell you whether or not you answered the question correctly. That's not the point. It's just pointing out to you the things that you should be thinking about. In recent versions of FS Flying School Pro, we've also added features that have introduced a very large number of general tips as well, both concerning the operation of Flight Simulator, of FS Flying School itself, and also just general aviation tips. So if you have background chatter turned on, you will get a lot of conversation from the instructor when you're in those quieter periods, and of course this can help pass the time. When you're cruising along, it may not be particularly exciting at that time, and it means that you can learn while you're flying along with us and building up your aviation knowledge at the same time. We've also got background humor, which the pop-up tooltip there tells us is Jolly Chuckles. That's very useful. And basically here, I'm not going to tell you what it is because I'd rather you were surprised. But it's not for everybody. It's all perfectly clean. It's G-rated, as we might say. But if you're not in the mood for it, then you can, of course, turn it off. Moving down, we've got the monitoring of ground traffic. The instructors have got a sharp eye, and as you're taxiing around on the ground, if this option is turned on, they will be keeping an eye on the other aircraft that are down there with you, and if you start to get a bit too close to them, or they're getting a bit too close to you, they will certainly let you know that in no uncertain terms. You've got the same option for monitoring air traffic. Same concept. If there is any air traffic that is starting to get a little bit too close, and we might want to keep an eye on it, we might even want to take evasive action, then the instructor can let you know that with the monitor air traffic option if that is turned on. Moving on, we have, does the instructor notice failures? If this option is turned on, then the instructor, when a failure occurs, will tell you what has occurred. Now, of course, we might ask, what is the point of having the instructor not notice failures? That is to say, why would we turn this off? Well, of course, if the instructor is noticing failures and is reporting them to you, then you're not doing it yourself. It is much more of a challenge, of course, if you don't have somebody watching that sort of thing for you, and you've developed enough skill that you can detect that something has failed yourself. So if the instructor notices the failures, then that's what we might call the easy mode, and if that's turned off so that it's up to you to notice the failures, then that is, of course, the more realistic, more difficult mode, more challenging mode. Next one up is, do we want taxiing in wind advice? The instructor will give this if we are piloting a light aircraft and we're taxiing about and there is significant wind. The instructor will let us know how we should be orienting the control surfaces of the aircraft in relation to the wind, and this can be a bit of a handful to do correctly. And so we can turn this on or off depending on how realistic and how challenging we want the flight with FS Flying School to be that day. We also have the option to monitor the use of lights. Now this checkbox works in conjunction with the lights that we've indicated that we want to monitor at the aircraft screen, which is this button over here. We can, at that screen, we can indicate the specific lights that we want the instructor to monitor the use of. So, for example, we might want the instructor to monitor the use of the taxi lights and the landing lights, but nothing else. So we can set that at the aircraft screen, and then at this screen, we determine whether or not the instructor monitors the use of any lights ever in any aircraft. So it's up to you. Of course, as I've already said now with several of the other checkboxes at this screen, if we want an easy time, then we turn off the monitoring of the use of lights, and if we want a more realistic, more challenging time, then we turn on the monitoring of the use of lights. We've also got the next item now, which is the waypoint advice, and this means that the instructor, as we're approaching a waypoint, is going to let us know what waypoint is coming up next, what it's called. It's is going to let us know when we get to that waypoint which heading we should then be setting to be heading off to the next waypoint, and this tends to produce a more immersive feeling when you're flying along. It feels more realistic. You've got your instructor next to you, giving you advice, engaging in a way in a conversation with you, gives him or her something else to talk about, which is all good fun. And of course, it's useful advice. If you turn it off, then of course, as I've said before, the thing becomes more challenging because it's up to you. You're totally on your own. You've got to figure it out yourself. It's there if you want it. Then we also have the VOR and NDB advice, which is in a similar sort of vein. If you have this option turned on, then the instructor will advise you which frequency that you need to set for the next nav aid in your flight plan, and again, it's there if you want it. So those are the sound setup options that we have there. We also have control setup options here. Now, if we're using a yoke that has or for that matter, a joystick that has a spring that will cause it to exert pressure when you are pushing on it, when you're moving it away from its central position, then you may wish to turn this checkbox on, because what will happen is this will very realistically cause the instructor to be advising you to use the trimmer to trim the aircraft properly, so that you're not having to exert this pressure on the yoke or the joystick in order to fly the aircraft in the manner that you want it to. And if you follow the instructor's advice and you do use the trim to set it correctly, then you will find that you don't have white knuckles quite so much, and it will reduce the strain on yourself as you're flying along. We've also got a checkbox for whether or not we're using a rudder controller. And if you do have a rudder controller, then you would certainly want to have that turned on. If you have it turned on, then the instructor will be closely watching your use of the rudder, and if you're not making coordinated turns, then the instructor will let you know that. We move down to the failures section of the pilot's screen. This is where we determine the aircraft reliability, and also whether or not we want to have so-called loose wire failures. The failures can be a very challenging and very exciting and fun area of FS Flying School. There are many different devices and systems that can fail if the failures are turned on, and the likelihood of something failing is controlled by simply moving this slider up and down the slider bar here, which we can see it will change the number here, and the number basically means that if we're all the way at the top here, then the likelihood of failure is very, very small, and if we went all the way down to the bottom here, the likelihood is that several systems and instruments and so forth would fail within the first few seconds of having connected to the flight. A pretty disastrous aircraft is running on this reliability level of 1. We can turn off failures entirely, of course, by unticking that checkbox there. So if we want to have a medium or challenging sort of a risk while we're flying, we might pop it up something like that. We're going to get failures if we put it in this sort of an area. We're going to get failures if we fly for hours on end. If we fly short flights, we probably won't see any failures. And, well, what can fail. We've got everything from the flaps to the gear to the just about every instrument that's in the cockpit. We've got the pitot tube, the autopilot, all this sort of things, different sections of the autopilot, many different things that can fail, and several of which are not, or rather, I should say, are well beyond the failures that are available to us in Flight Simulator itself. So we've got lots of things that can fail that will not fail just by using Flight Simulator's own inherent built-in failure system. We also have the interesting option of having what we call loose wire failures, which can be turned on and off with that checkbox right there. And what this does is it means that you've got a failure to a system or a device or instrument, whatever, that let's imagine that there is some sort of transient fault. Maybe it is a loose wire if it's an electrical component, something like this, and it means that the device can fail and then start working again and then possibly fail again and so forth and so on during the flight. So that adds another curveball for us, another area of challenging things that we have to look at while we're flying along with Flying School. So those are up to you. If you don't want any of that excitement or challenge, then of course you can just turn failures off completely. But if you do have it turned on, then you'll get what I've just described. We'll finish looking at the options before we look at the management of the pilot himself or herself. We've got the automatic radio tuning setup here, and this is very simple. We can have the instructor will automatically tune the navigation radio 1 to the ILS, or the instrument landing system at the destination airport. That's a handy feature. It can reduce the workload. But again, if you want more of a challenge, then you would turn that off so that you'd have to do it yourself. The same thing is true with the option to have the instructor automatically tune a radio for the ATIS, the Automatic Terminal Information Service, at your destination airport. Note that he puts this onto Communication Radio 2, COM 2, so that it doesn't interfere with your COM 1, which you are likely to be using, or you may be using to communicate with Air Traffic Control, ATC. You've also got the option to have the instructor automatically tune nav1 to the VOR if it is your next waypoint. So if the next waypoint coming up is a VOR, then your instructor can automatically tune that for you. Let's see, we've also got the automatic detection set up. These are very important. By default, they're turned on. And what they mean is that if you've got, for example, the cruise mode set up for automatic detection, that means that after you take off, you climb to your cruise altitude, and then you level off, and the instructor is going to be watching for you leveling off at some point. And if he or she determines that, okay, he's been keeping an eye on the level that we've been flying at for a while, and he's or she is decided that you appear to be cruising, then your flight mode in FS Flying School Pro will be automatically changed to cruise. This will mean that you won't have to press Control-Shift-Z to advance the or Control-Shift-Z to advance the flight mode into cruise mode from takeoff mode. It will be done automatically for you. And the same can be done with landing mode. That is to say, you're cruising along, and then if you start a steady descent, the instructor will notice this and will announce that you appear to be in landing mode, and off you go. Now, as far as why would we want this to be turned off? If we turn this off, it simply gives us better control over what's happening. We tell the instructor when we have started cruising, and we tell the instructor when we're going into landing mode. It's the difference between automation and control. It's most pilots who have flown with FS Flying School and got some experience with it under their belt will turn this option off. They'll turn these two automatic detection can set up options off so that they can tell the instructor precisely when it is that those modes have been entered. Gives you more control. Okay, and then finally we come to the pilots section of the pilots screen. Basically, all the configurations that we've entered at this screen can be saved with reference to a particular pilot. Now we can call it, the pilot name can be your own name if you like, so you could have a name like Bob or Dave or Frank or Sheila or Jane or Linda. It's up to you. Or you might want to choose names that describe the sort of flying that pilot's going to do. So you might have GA pilot, or you might have a pilot called Heavy Iron pilot. On the other hand, you might have a pilot called Sport pilot, you might have a pilot called Bush pilot, and you can put your have a different configuration at this screen for each pilot. Some of the pilots' profiles might encourage more realistic flying than other pilots. So in some cases you might set up a pilot to be very relaxed, very easygoing, lots of help from the instructor, lots of automatic options from the instructor. That's one kind of pilot. You might set up another kind of pilot who wants a very challenging profile, very little help from the instructor and lots of input from the instructor in terms of monitoring what you're doing, watching everything you're doing with the lights, with the taxiing, and da-da-da-da-da. It's up to you. It depends on what sort of experience you want to have that day. And you can set up as many profiles as you like using the mechanism of creating a new pilot, and then you fill in your options, and then you save the pilot, and then when you want to switch pilots, of course, you load the pilot, and so forth. Keep in mind that the program is shipped with two pilots. You can create as many as you like. As I said, there's a pilot called Lightspeed and a pilot called Heavy Iron. You do not, please follow this, you do not need to create a new pilot when you get FS Flying School. When you install it, you do not need to create a new pilot. So please just start out, use one of the existing pilot profiles, change it if you wish, make some modifications and save it if you wish, but you don't need to create a new one. Okay, and that just about wraps up our description of the pilot screen of FS Flying School Pro.